Well, good morning, guys. It's Pastor Andy, and I want to thank you for joining me for devotions today. On Sunday in our church, we talked about the chisel and choosing the chisel and how we need to allow God to remove anything that is connected to our life that does not reveal His Son. So when people look at me, they need to see Jesus, not Andy or not whoever you are. So we need to allow God to do that. And the passage that we used was in Romans chapter 12, or in Hebrews chapter 12. And I want us to this week, we're going to drill down on Hebrews chapter 12. So Hebrews chapter 12 verse 1 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance the race God has set before us." I want us to just look at this verse this morning and just talk about this one verse as we begin. But here when we look at this chapter in this first verse of Hebrews 12, we need to understand that this is picking up from the prior chapter. The way we know that is the first verse, or the first word of this verse, is therefore. And the first rule of Bible study, the first rule of homiletics, the study of God's Word, is when you see the word therefore, you always ask one question, and that is, what's it there for? So, therefore, what's it there for? So it's bridging this gap between the prior chapter because of what happened in chapter 11. Therefore, now chapter 12. Well, what is Hebrews chapter 11? Hebrews chapter 11 is the hall of faith, where we see people, Jesus talking about Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Joseph, Moses, Rahab, which is an unbelievable one to me, that God put a woman who was a prostitute, not only in the hall of faith, but in the lineage of his son. So we got Rahab, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. So when we see and we understand that this huge crowd that Jesus has talked about, that the apostle has listed here for us in Hebrews 11, he starts Hebrews 12 saying, therefore. Now, because of all of these and their faith, now he goes on and says, therefore, consequently, we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses. That huge crowd there, that word literally means a large, dense multitude. And it's the same word that we get our English word martyr from. This witness, this witnesses. It's not just someone who sits by an observer. This is someone who is an active participant. So when we're talking about this huge crowd of witnesses, it's really important for us to understand that this huge crowd that is there, these witnesses that are there, it's not that they are sitting in the stands in the bleachers watching us. No, they're not witnessing us. They are a witness for us. So as I am running my race, as this verse says, I need to understand that there's a huge crowd of witnesses, people who are there as an example for me. They are a witness to God's strength, that God is going to see us through. And that's the first thing that we see in this chapter is, one, we've got to look around at the winners, people who have already run the race, people who finished, people who made it all the way through and were known as a person of faith. So we see this huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith. Because of that, it goes on and says, let us strip off every weight that slows us down. That means to cast off. So now that we've seen the witnesses, we've looked at the winners who are around us, now I've looked at the winners, now I need to look at myself. I need to examine Andy. You need to examine you, and I need to check me and make sure that I'm good. I'm supposed to throw off these weights. It kind of has the idea of the Greek games. And in this chapter, it talks about sports and citizenship. So, and the two went together in the Greek and Roman mindset, because this is all playing towards the Greek games, the Roman games, all of these things. So you couldn't participate if you weren't a citizen. And then in the end of this chapter, he's going to talk about our true citizenship, which is in heaven. So he's saying to lay off these weights. So these runners would carry weights with them. It's kind of like wearing a weighted vest or ankle weights or something like that. Or if you like baseball, it's like the guy who's in the batting circle. He's got his bat up on his shoulder and he puts that weight collar on the bat so that when he swings, he gets used to that extra weight. And then when you take that weight off, you can swing the bat a lot faster. When you take off that vest or those ankle weights, you can run a lot faster. You can be more effective. You can go further. You can win. It's going to increase your effectiveness. So as Christians, the race that we are in, the life that God has put us in, with the goal in front of us of being a person of faith, we've got to lay aside all of the things that maybe even good things that other people would see in their perspective, but things that would slow us down. It's not a choice between good and bad. Most of us don't have trouble between choosing between what's right and wrong. That's pretty easy. But the difficulty is choosing between what's good and what is better. And that's the tough thing for us as Christians. Good and bad's easy. Better and best is hard. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to lay aside all of these things that could slow us down in the race that we're in. So he goes on and says, let us strip off every weight, or that word weight there means burden, encumbrance, hindrance, anything that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up. That word there that's used for easily trips us up is thwarting in every direction. It's skillfully surrounding. It's the thing that is always there. It's that temptation or that sin that is always there that just seems to grab us, that we just can't get victory over. We've got to especially put that down if we're going to be a person of faith. And let us run with endurance. That word endurance has to do with a careful consistency. It's patience. It's has to do with being excited about it, being happy about the race that I'm in. So I've got to run with endurance. I'm going to push it. I'm going to keep going no matter what, so that I can complete the race that God has put in front of me. So I'm going to run with endurance the race that is set before us. Again, this race that he's talking about would have made perfect sense to the Hebrew mind, because they would have been, these are people he's talking to that would have been very familiar with the Greek and Roman games. So they've got this word picture that they are completely understanding. This made perfect sense to them. That we as believers need to understand that God has left us some examples, some witnesses, some winners. These aren't spectators who are watching us. These are bearing witness that God is going to see us through. He's left us examples. So he's left them for us. We need to understand that they are there. We have people. We know that we can make it. And then we need to examine ourselves and make sure that I'm making it as easy for me to win the race, to complete my race as possible. Putting off things that would slow me down, even good things, so that I can complete the race that God has put me in, the race of my Christian life, the life that he has put me here for. And then as we go through the next couple of days in verse 2 through 4, we're not just looking at the crowd, we're not just looking at ourselves. Verse 2 through 4, we're looking at Christ. And I look forward to talking about that with you. So I hope you'll get into God's Word, read it for yourself, and see what he has for you. And until tomorrow, God bless you and have a great day.